Good evening. Wow, you guys need to synchronize somehow, because so the first part I don't need to read. I'm Ron Kagan, CEO and Executive Director of the Detroit Zoological Society. We're very happy that you're joining us tonight for the Center for Zoo Animal Welfare Public Lecture Series. The mission of the Zoological Society's Center for Animal Welfare is to advance captive exotic animal welfare science and policy to help ensure that zoo and aquarium animals are thriving, not just surviving. This week, we've had over 140 world leaders in animal welfare gathered here for the International Animal Welfare Congress. And we just wrapped up about 2 hours ago this 3-day symposium. Really was a congress to address the ethical dimensions and global commitment to animal welfare for zoo and aquarium animals around the world. One of the leaders, in fact, he is one of the true giants at this conference, was Wayne Pacelle. And I'm not going to read his bio because I know him so well that I want to tell you not the stats, but who he is and what he does. And I've known him for a very long time. The Humane Society of the United States for a long time was an organization that had noble aspirations, but not all that much impact. And during his tenure, first as a lobbyist and head of communications, and then for the past 13 years, I think it is, as the CEO, he has transformed that organization and its impact. And for those of us that are mission-driven and that really care about issues like saving nature, helping the relationship between people and animals, that bond, which in fact was the name of his first book, having impact is what's important, not just having a noble mission. And he's had incredible impact. In fact, just over the past several years, working with the Obama administration, almost 50 rulemaking changes were enacted that have affected millions of animals in every possible way you can think of. So Wayne is truly heroic in what he does, and he is going to talk to you tonight about the humane economy, which is also the name of his most recent book. After his talk, we'll have a few minutes for questions, and then for those of you that would like to have your book signed by him or would like to buy a book and then have it signed by him, he will be available outside in the lobby. So please give a warm welcome to Wayne Pacelle.
Thank you all for coming on a Saturday night. And I want to say to Ron, who I guess is going to emerge through that door, Ron, I just want to say of all the introductions I've received, that one is the most recent. Thank you very, very much. Ron is, I could opine on him for the entire length of this talk, so I won't go into it. But I want to say that we are in the presence, I think, of the best leader in the world from a major zoological institution. He has redefined what zoos do in the United States and increasingly abroad. So, Ron, we're all in your debt. You have done an incredible job. Incredible job. So I want to tell you about this concept of the humane economy. As Ron mentioned, it's the title of my latest book. And obviously, we at the Humane Society of the United States are focused on this idea of making progress for animals. And I need to tell you a little bit about the Humane Society of the U.S. in order to get to the broader themes. You can see from this image here that we're about protecting all animals. You can see our logo embedded On this slide, it's 19 different animals in the shape of the United States. That's meant to convey that we work to protect all animals, and we do it on a big scale. And it means that we are helping rescue animals in crisis, but we are also working on the biggest institutional uses of animals and looking at the circumstances of animals from a macro level perspective. And that there's no way that we can rescue our way out of the crises for animals. And that while rescue is noble and important and urgent and good, and we do a lot of it, and Ron does a lot of it, and animal welfare groups all over the United States and the world do a lot of it, if we did just that, we would be failing animals. Because many animals are legally used in major institutions. The whole notion of rescue is inapplicable. And there aren't enough of us to rescue the animals at risk. And that's what I'm going to tell you about. But HSUS does a lot of animal care work. We touched 300,000 animals last year with our programs in the United States and abroad through Humane Society International. And of course, the precept of that is that we humans care deeply about animals. I was just speaking to Ron and asking him to remind me about the numbers of visitation to U.S. major accredited zoos in the United States and aquariums each year. And he said the number is about 170 million, but there are some people who come multiple times. So it's 100 or 110 million people a year. That's a third of the U.S. population going to see animals in zoos. That is one extraordinary indicator of the connectivity that we humans have toward animals. But it's manifest in many ways, of course. The way that so many of us think about our interactions with animals is with our pets. I've got a beloved dog and cat, and I bring my dog to work every day, and the cat doesn't go to work, stays home, watches the house. And I'm sure all of you at one time in your life have had a companion animal. Most of you probably have one or more now. And this is an incredible feature of our human experience now. One of the things I argued in my first book is that we came out of nature. For 99% of human history, we were hunters and gatherers, and we were immersed in nature. We were nomadic. We didn't have permanent settlements. What we did have as a species was an intimate knowledge of plants and animals and the entire biotic community. And if you look at surviving tribal societies today, in the Amazon or in Papua New Guinea or other parts of the world, many of the people who are members of these societies and where hunting is part of their survival strategy, they have rituals of apology and atonement to the animals. Many of them think they're going to come back as animals. So the whole notion that we are connected to animals is built into our DNA. It's who we are as a species. So this is not surprising that there are 171 million dogs and cats in our homes. And if you add in the rabbits and the hamsters and the birds, it's 350 million, which places more pets than people in American households. But that is also just one other indicator. And we spend $60 billion a year on these animals: food, veterinary services, toys. My Lily has a lot of toys, and I'm sure many of your animals have a lot of toys as well. But we also go into nature because it's a tonic to our soul to be connected to animals and to see beautiful vistas and to see animals. And we spend tens of billions of dollars a year. We have a whole network of national parks. Ken Burns called it America's greatest idea. These incredible places from Acadia to Everglades to Yellowstone to Olympic to Death Valley. And we have state forests, state parks. We have national forests, national wildlife refuges. Even in our biggest cities, we have big parks. Right in the middle of New York City, our most populous city in the United States, is Central Park. Acres and acres. So even in this height of human civilization, settlement, tall buildings, transportation, we want a place to go and to take a deep breath. This is who we are as a species, is to be connected to animals. So if you love animals, people say, well, why do you love animals? They're the ones who are strange for asking such a question, not you, who cares about animals and loves animals, because it's always been part of the human experience. Animals have been always central to the human experience. And really what we're talking about is how to handle and manage that relationship in this dizzyingly complex world where now we use animals in many industries. But to take the broader view, this is a slide from 1985, and it's an indication of what the state of state laws was on some of the most malicious forms of cruelty. So if you can see it, the blue pit bull type dog, the top item under the 1985 marker there, a state with that symbol in it in 1985, so about 30 years ago, had a felony level penalty for dogfighting. You can see it's about 10 states scattered around the country, some, a couple in the West, a couple in the Midwest, a couple even in the South, upper Midwest, and New England. The White Rooster is a state that had felony level penalties for cockfighting in 1985, just a handful, 3 or 4, mainly in the northern states, but very, very sparse, very, very scarce. And the final one is the yellow cat that represents a state that had felony level penalties for malicious cruelty, doing something truly awful to a dog, cat, horse, or other animal. And if you were prosecuted under that statute, you would have felony level penalties. You can see, again, just a handful of states, Oklahoma, Michigan, you can see, and then a couple of New England states. That was it. So we at the Humane Society of the U.S. said, my God, if we're going to take on the biggest problems that exist in our human relationship with animals, we've got to fortify the basic legal framework against cruelty. How can we treat the most malicious acts of cruelty as trifling activities? Treat them as, something that is, it's bad, but it's not that bad, and just have, a small fine, no jail time. So we've worked very hard with other groups as well to fortify this network, and now this is what it looks like. In the last quarter century, every state has made dogfighting a felony. Every state has outlawed cockfighting. Every single state, South Dakota was the last one in 2014, that has made malicious cruelty a felony level offense. So what a marker in our society of the success of these core tenets of a civil society that we should not tolerate cruelty to animals. So this issue is no longer in dispute. We as a society reject cruelty to animals. The question now, and this is the central question that I think about every day at the Humane Society of the U.S., in the privileged position of helping to run the organization, is how do we logically apply anti-cruelty principles in a world where animals are used in the food supply, in science and testing, and wildlife management, in the entertainment industry, in so many other major sectors of our economy, where these enterprises are generating billions of dollars of commerce. There are thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people employed in these enterprises. How do we address those questions? That is the really challenging question, and that is where we are working to build a humane economy. So again, the challenge is to look at these industries that have built-in defense mechanisms to keep these practices going. You can see puppy mills up in the upper far corner for me. Right in the center, elephants used in the circus, rabbits just to the right of the elephants used in testing for cosmetics or pesticides or chemicals. On that same level, a fox being caught in a steel-jawed leghorn trap for his or her fur. The bottom level, all animals, different species, different breeds in confinement, so severe that they can't turn around. This is the challenge. This is the central task of the modern animal protection movement, is to confront these big crisis situations for animals and to transform them and turn them around. And the goal is, again, to build this notion of a humane economy where business is not just about making profits. It's not just about generating jobs and profits. All of those things are good. We need jobs to have a good lifestyle. We need money to buy food and have other necessities of life, to enjoy life beyond the necessities, to experience things. But life is not just about economics alone. It's about joy, and it's about other-centeredness. And the values in our society that we value extend just beyond monetary issues and profit-oriented issues. We care about our neighbors. We care about our country. Patriotism is an important value. Global community is an important value. Protecting the environment, caring for children, caring for other vulnerable beings, caring for animals is a value. Again, remember that map I showed you with all of the states with felony-level penalties for animal cruelty. That's a value that we hold dear. It's a universal value now. So the notion of a humane economy is that we align our business practices with our values, and that if you disassociate them, you get terrible outcomes because you subordinate the other values that matter to us in society and are left just with the profit motive. And that's never what we've been about as a country. We were founded, as a nation in the latter part of the 18th century. We had a Declaration of Independence. We had a Constitution and the principles of justice and opposition to tyranny. And lots of other values were part of our marrow from the very start. And now we've evolved to the point where evolved in a cultural sense where we recognize that animals matter. And we've evolved in the way that we do science to recognize that animals think and they feel. They have lives that matter to them. They want to avoid pain and suffering like we want to avoid pain and suffering. And if they live more in the moment than we do and don't have as much a sense of past and future, then all the more important that we protect their present circumstance and give them the comfort that we would all want as living organisms. So one of the archetypal examples of the humane economy is the issue of how we have treated whales. And this shows the evolution in the relationship with one species, and I think provides the example for us on what we can achieve with other species. We used to be the biggest whaling nation in the world, plying the world's oceans with men on ships going into the Atlantic and Pacific, hunting for fin whales and right whales and humpback whales and sperm whales, and harpooning these animals, killing them, taking their oil and other body parts, and mainly using the oil to power a growing economy in the 18th and 19th centuries. And we exploited whales in large numbers given the relative technology that we had at the time. But really around the 1860s, we started to see a burgeoning conservation movement. Most movements are a response to a crisis situation. And the conservation movement emerged in the 1860s because we were liquidating the bison and the passenger pigeons. We were now just starting to think about our responsibilities to animals and the planet and to principles like conservation. We saw the first national park created in Yellowstone in 1872. We saw the first humane organizations formed. So we started to think about what our duties were to other creatures. And we also were growing this economy. And any economy is built on innovation, ingenuity, new ways of doing things. And we began to find other ways to power this economy, other forms of energy. We discovered petroleum in the 1870s as an alternative to whale oil. And it was that confluence of our awakening moral attention with human innovation in the economy that enabled us to start to reevaluate our relationship with whales. And it took decades and decades, but over time we became an anti-whaling nation, fighting commercial whaling all over the world. And now the U.S. is part of a multinational agreement called the International Whaling Commission. And the U.S. and New Zealand and Australia and Chile and a number of other countries fight every year against commercial whaling. Now, just 3 nations in the world conduct commercial whaling. And now the United States and dozens of other coastal nations now monetize the appreciation of whales. Because you can watch a whale 10 times or 100 times or 500 times. You can harpoon the whale only once. So you can now go on ships in search of whales and not go with a harpoon, but just with your field glasses, binoculars, or just your naked eye, and see the biggest animals who have ever lived on the planet. A blue whale can be 100 feet long and weigh 100 tons. I mean, these are incredible animals, bigger than the largest dinosaurs that ever walked on the planet, and they're on our planet right now. And we're the custodians of them. And now we're able to build multi-billion-dollar businesses around appreciating them. And it's the whalers, the people who would kill these whales, who threaten this enterprise. So this is where we want to evolve in the other areas. You know, cutting off the fins of sharks is another example. I mean, now there are tens of millions of dollars generated by dive operations all throughout coastal nations of the world to watch sharks. Yet we're killing 70 million of them a year, according to some estimates, mainly for their fins, for shark fin soup. This is now an activity under siege, as it should be. But another example, a contemporary example, where, you know, in 1940 or 1930, we were looking at the commercial whaling issue and saying, what are we going to do about it? This is one of the things that we should be doing about in terms of marine creatures right now. And there's national legislation that the Detroit Zoo and the Association of Zoos and Aquariums are endorsing to stop this practice right now. Another issue where the humane economy is in transition is our treatment of dogs. And we now estimate there are about 10,000 puppy mills in this country where dogs are treated, the mother dogs in particular, are treated like breeding machines, and the puppies are treated like a cash crop. And the mothers are in cages outside all the time, often in stacked cages, wire flooring, no veterinary care, no protection from the elements. So it could be bitingly cold in northern Iowa or northern Missouri, or it could be the height of summer, over 110 degrees somewhere, and these dogs get no relief. And they're churned out for the pet trade at the same time when we've got 3,500 shelters and nearly 15,000 dog and cat rescue organizations working in this country to adopt out homeless animals. These mills are flooding our communities with puppies when we are trying to deal with the crisis of pet overpopulation and the euthanasia of healthy and treatable animals, and to ask people thinking about bringing an animal into their homes and into their lives to choose adoption, so you get the double bottom line benefit of getting a wonderful new companion, but then you also save a life. And the puppy mills are undermining this. But one of the great examples, this is my Lily, who's a Beagle mix. We adopted her from a PetSmart in Northern Virginia. I live in the DC area, and Lily was about to be euthanized at a rural shelter in Virginia. A lot of hunting-type dogs are discarded, and they are filling up many of these rural shelters and are euthanized. Fortunately, there was a group that pulled Lily, a rescue group called Lost Dog and Cat Rescue, that pulled her and then brought her to PetSmart for adoption, and we adopted her. And she's this fabulous little girl whom we love every single day and send pictures when I'm away. I ask for my Lily pictures each day. She doesn't really change, but I still want the pictures. And PetSmart and Petco decided when they were formed that they were not going to pursue the model of selling dogs from commercial dog breeding operations in the Midwest and Pennsylvania. They were going to throw open the doors of their stores, their 2,500 stores now, to local rescues and shelters and make those animals available. And since they've done that, now nearly 12 million dogs and cats have been adopted through this channel alone. And what they've also found out is that a new adopter, just like me and my wife Lisa, buys a lot more stuff because you get a psychic high from adopting this animal. And you want to give this animal who had this, uncertain life before you, and all the, pain and misery that you imagine they might have endured, you want to take that away and give them comfort. So the average adopter spends 5 times as much at Petco and PetSmart than the average customer. So it's good for the bottom line. They get great publicity, you get loyalty, so you keep coming back to the store because that's where I got my animal, and it's wonderful for the business. An example of the humane economy where a company is doing the right thing, and it's also good for the bottom line. You don't have lawsuits. You don't have regulatory actions to try to change what you're doing. You know, the pet stores that are selling dogs are in a big fight with HSUS, and you better believe that we're going to give these people a tough run. We're going to file lawsuits. We're going to do bills. We're going to do protests. We're going to make life very difficult for them. When you do the right thing, you just take all of that away, and then you just have the positive experiences from the pet owners. The circus is also a great example of how things are evolving in our direction. Ringling Brothers, after 145 years, 2 years ago, announced that it's ending its use of elephants in circuses. Now, so many of us went to the circus as kids because we love the animals and we're drawn to them. And this is an opportunity to see the animals. But we didn't know the backstory. Most of us didn't know that elephants are on chains for 22 hours a day. They are shuttled to 150 cities a year on railroad cars. They are 3 nights in Detroit, and then 3 nights in Milwaukee, and 3 nights in Minneapolis, and 3 nights in Bismarck, and 3 nights in Cheyenne and Denver. I mean, an endless travel, endless confinement, not with members of their family, doing silly stunts and tricks that are not their natural behavior, but are induced typically by forcible training techniques, where an animal is struck with a bull hook, which is a combination of a baseball bat and a fire poker, hitting the animal in his or her sensitive parts to instill fear and obedience to perform on command. Now, as so many animal welfare groups and Ron Kagan and others have made the case, this began to unwind for the circus, and the circus realized this was a liability for it. And I think it's important to note that they still had tigers and bears and other animals, and they announced earlier this year that they're going out of business entirely. And part of the explanation is our growing moral concern. But the other side of this is human innovation. That Cirque du Soleil, as a form of circus and entertainment, which uses human acrobats and incredible choreography, was offering a very novel and exciting alternative to something that frankly looks archaic and inhumane. And it's that constant innovation we humans are capable of that makes these terrible forms of animal exploitation particularly bad and archaic, and a new way forward. So again, they're shutting down. The last show is this month in May. What a time to be talking about this when the big brand in the field is going out of business because people just didn't want to see it any longer. Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, just banned all wild animal acts last week. Elephants, tigers, lions, and other wild animal acts, an incredible marker. Ringling used to be the political protector of the small circuses as well as its own circus. Now that's gone. You're going to see a cascade of local, state, and ultimately a federal law on this issue. You know, the Detroit Zoo has taken refugees from some of these acts. This was the brown bear Polly, rescued from a traveling circus in 2000. The Detroit Zoo was one of the first zoos in the country really to open up its doors to animals who were really in need of rescue, not having more and more breeding, but taking animals in need, fulfilling its needs for exhibition, but also telling a story, being part of the humane economy, contributing to good outcomes. We need policies, though. It's not just up to individual institutions. We need to pass the Big Cat Public Safety Act to stop these menageries and opportunities where little entrepreneurs use small kittens and cubs and give people the chance to hold them and pet them and perpetuate this breeding, and then these animals get discarded, and then they get thrust into the humane community, which then has a 15 or 20-year liability to care for these animals or to give them to an accredited zoo who then has that liability. We need policies to stop this. This is another bill that AZA is endorsing, as well as the Detroit Zoo. But there's always an effort to conceal. Anytime you're driving reform, there's an attempt to obscure what's going on. And now the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which has an animal care program, and enforces our federal animal welfare laws, it was putting data from its inspections on a publicly searchable website so we could see who the bad actors were and we could concentrate on them. They took it down at the beginning of February, and now we're fighting to get it restored because transparency and information is crucial to the functioning of a humane economy. We can only build that humane economy if we have information that we can act on as individuals and as organizations, as policymakers. So we're working hard to deal with that. But you know, it's also important to note that sometimes sanctuaries can be pseudo-sanctuaries. You know, not every group that's called a sanctuary is actually operating well. There was just a big cat sanctuary in Colorado where they euthanized 11 animals the other day because they were having problems at their site and they were denied an option to move to another part of the county. And rather than seek homes for the animals, they killed all of them. We see hoarding cases and other problems. So these facilities need to be inspected and accredited as well, just like zoos need to be inspected and accredited. Third-party validation is also a part of the humane economy. And AZA has a rigorous program. The Detroit Zoo is one of about 220 or so zoos and aquariums that are accredited in the United States. There are another 2,000 unaccredited zoos. Roadside menageries, many of them where captive wild animals are being exploited day after day. And now there's a new accrediting group for sanctuaries called the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, and we at HSUS are part of that to have good standards for sanctuaries, so you can know that if you're going to be a donor to them, that there are good outcomes for those animals. On the issue of captive animals, I'm sure many of you watched this film, Blackfish. Just like the brand species for Ringling Brothers was the elephant, the brand species for SeaWorld was the orca, and Blackfish upended that. Again, information in this new emerging humane economy telling the backstory. SeaWorld had a different narrative, and this was a debate between SeaWorld and animal welfare groups for many years, but Blackfish really kind of thrust this issue into our living rooms. We all began to talk about it and think about it, and it was about this time last year that Joel Manby and I, the CEO of SeaWorld, negotiated an agreement to stop the breeding of orcas and to institute a whole series of other reforms at SeaWorld, to have SeaWorld engage in advocacy programs like ending shark finning and commercial whaling, to change its entire food policy for all of the establishments that it has, and 20 million people coming into their parks every year, more plant-based options, more humanely produced animal products, because these are all connected animal welfare issues. So we celebrated SeaWorld's change, even though we had been a big adversary for many, many years. But the changes in the humane economy are happening in all sectors of the economy, and that's why I conclude that this is not some passing sort of fancy. It's not some particular set of circumstances that are leading to change in one area. We're seeing big changes in so many sectors, including in animal testing, cosmetic testing, where animals are poisoned to decide how much poison it takes to kill half the subject group, called a lethal dose 50 test, or a Dray's eye irritancy test, where one eye is left untouched, the other is the one that has substances dropped into the eye, so the animal can't cleanse the eye. And we see the effects of that, and then somehow say, well, now we know what the toxicity of the product is, and now we're going to market it. The reality is we have non-animal methods of looking at risk of chemicals and cosmetics and pesticides, and we're now using those much more reliably, better science, faster, cheaper. And now, in terms of the cosmetics industry, you have hundreds of companies that are now not testing on animals. In India, this clip talks about India, the second most populous nation in the world. Not only does it forbid cosmetic testing on animals, it forbids selling cosmetics that were tested on animals anywhere else in the world, closing off 1/7 of the planet's population to these global cosmetic makers. The EU has done the same thing. New Zealand, the United States should be next. And now all of these companies have said they're committed to no animal testing. And if you look at their products, you'll see a no animal testing symbol on the product. I can assure you that the companies that are still testing on animals don't say we test on animals. They want to hide it. They want to obscure it. They don't want you as a consumer to know. And you know that they're in trouble when their enterprise depends on you not knowing. And now, in a world of social media and labeling, we now are really becoming more conscious and informed consumers, and we're acting on this information, and that's driving changes in the humane economy. This is an image that many of you saw 2 summers ago. Pacelle, the lion killed by this Minnesota dentist, Walter Palmer, and his Zimbabwean hunting guide. They lured Pacelle out of Humane National Park. He happened to be one of the most studied lions in the world, studied by Oxford University researchers. He had a radio tracking collar around his neck. They tried to discard that collar, and Walter Palmer was pursuing lions because the Safari Club International gives out an award to hunters called the Africa Big Five. And you get the award if you shoot a lion, a leopard, an elephant, a rhino, and a Cape buffalo. So this man chose to use his wealth. He chose to use his time off to travel halfway around the world to kill an innocent creature, a creature who was not bothering him, a creature who was not bothering anybody because he was living in a national park, a creature who was a draw for thousands and thousands of tourists all over the world because he had been so closely studied and followed. And this image, which was obtained by a brave Zimbabwean activist who put it on social media, ricocheted all over the world, and 1 billion people saw it in a couple of days. And within 30 days of this image making the rounds all over the world, all of these airlines said, we're not going to carry trophies in the cargo hold anymore. So these airlines, all the biggest U.S. carriers, Delta, American, United, all the biggest European carriers, Asian carriers, their business, the center of their business is not about trafficking in animal parts, it's trafficking in live humans. They jam us into the small seats, and sometimes they drag us out of the seats. And, but they do have a cargo hold, but we don't know what the heck is down there. But when this image was transported so quickly all over the world, we then realized, oh, they're taking those trophies in the cargo. Well, we're not going to tolerate that anymore. So again, information is an antiseptic to anti-cruelty, to cruelty. And within, again, 30 days, after very little progress for many years, suddenly we had a new economic enterprise that was built around protecting wildlife. And Botswana, which has more elephants and more lions than any country in all of Africa, took this ad in National Geographic because it ended all trophy hunting of all animals in the country in 2015. And this ad says, from contemplation to conservation, again, advertising in a Western market to draw tourists, experience true ecotourism in a visionary country that outlaws hunting and believes only a camera should ever be aimed at a lion. Discover our award-winning eco-lodges on an amazing wildlife safari dedicated to protecting nature. This is the humane economy. It's not just the United States. It's not just Norway or Sweden, or it's countries all over the world recognizing that their most precious resources are living creatures. People go to African countries, so many of them, because they want to see these glorious creatures, the greatest assemblage of large terrestrial wildlife in the world. Preserving it is about protecting the economies of these countries. And of course, we have our own Cecil problem. We have Western states that kill thousands of lions, mainly by hunting them with packs of dogs. We're working hard against that. But elephants, this is a study that says elephants alive are 76 times more valuable than dead elephants. So you can sell the ivory and make some money, but if you keep the elephants alive, you can generate so much more revenue and economic activity. Doing the right thing morally is also the right thing economically, and that's the core of the humane economy. And these species are at risk, elephants and lions and giraffes. If we don't protect them, And our policy debates now, we're helping to lead the charge to protect these species through our Federal Endangered Species Act and through international conventions. These are urgent matters of morality because these species are being threatened. Their entire existence is being threatened. But I can assure you, if we lose them, these countries are going to lose so much of who they are. They're going to lose jobs. They're going to lose billions of dollars over time. This is about economic protection as well. And we've got big economic and moral issues here in states like Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota and the Great Lakes. We have wolves. We have had the only public votes on wolves in the United States here in Michigan. And in 2014, voters, by large margins, agreed to prevent any trophy hunting or trapping of wolves. And the legislature has been thumbing its nose at the people and their decision on this issue. This is unacceptable. We're going to keep fighting for wolves because we're not talking about just protecting large carnivores in Africa. We're talking about protecting them here in the United States. The lions and the wolves are critical for the ecology of our states. They balance ecosystems. They are economic drivers. People go to Isle Royale. People go to the UP. They go to the Boundary Waters areas to see these creatures. At Yellowstone, people go to see the wolves. It generates $35 million a year just to see the wolves in Yellowstone National Park. We're also changing the face of fashion. The biggest fashion companies are now shedding the use of fur. Hugo Boss, we negotiated an agreement with Boss 2 years ago. Last year, Giorgio Armani decided to go completely fur-free. We're going to continue to work with fashion companies because we now have alternatives. You can have faux fur or other synthetic or natural fiber garments that keep you warm, that are just as stylish. You can have all of the functionality of fur without killing a single creature directly. So there's no reason to do it. We now have the technology. Again, that combination of moral intention and human innovation can make animal cruelty obsolete. But the biggest issue of all is the issue of animals raised for food. And a lot of people don't think about this issue very much because it's just so normalized in our society that we sit down to our breakfast and our lunch and our dinner, if we're lucky enough to have 3 meals a day, and the food is put in front of us and we don't know the backstory, just like we didn't know the backstory of the elephants, or we don't know the backstory of the fur farms. We don't know the backstory of the steel jaw leg hole traps. We don't know the backstory of these farms. And really, right around 1960, we saw an incredible process of transformation in agriculture, where we used to have animals for decades, centuries, thousands of years, who were used for work purposes, used for food purposes. They were outside. They lived in densities that were appropriate. They could have access to pasture. They could feel sunlight on their backs and soil beneath their feet. But around 1960, we took some of the efficiency notions that we had in our manufacturing facilities for automobiles or refrigerators, and we decided to try to apply that efficiency to living beings. And we put these animals in big warehouses, and we jammed them in cages and crates, barely larger than their bodies, and we conscripted them into food production in massive, almost incalculable numbers to feed a growing human population. And this is in a view, a ceiling level view of a pig factory farm where the pigs are in a gestation crate. These are 300 or 400 or 500 pound animals that are in a 2-foot wide cage about as wide as my shoulders. And the cage is 7 feet long. All they can do is take 1 half step forward and 1 half step back. They go mad in these cages. They bite the bars. They swing their heads. The laying hens are in these cages, 6 or 8 birds in a cage. The industry voluntary standard is 67 square inches of space. This is 93 square inches of space. 67 is a 1/3 full. That's the living space that the hen has for the 12 to 18 months that she's alive. You know, I went to the largest egg factory farm in the U.S. and toured it. 10 million birds at a complex of 93 buildings and 150,000 birds per building, roughly. Birds were in these small wire cages about the size of a bread box or a microwave, side to side as long as a football field, stacked 8 high. in a building that was about this tall. And I looked around at these poor creatures who would never get out of that cage until they were forcibly handled and jammed into a crate to be shipped off to slaughter, which would be a horrible, harrowing experience for them. They'd never get out of this cage. And I thought to myself, are we this disconnected from the lives of these poor feeling creatures, these chickens? Are we this miserly that animals used for our food and sustenance get this kind of treatment? Are we this uncreative that this is the best that we can do? And I thought, how could we tolerate this as a society? How could this be a routine practice that we allow to be conducted day to day? Why aren't there laws to stop it? Just like, why weren't there laws to stop dogfighting or cockfighting in 1985? Why aren't there laws to stop this today? And I said, we've got to do something about this. And fortunately, we are doing something about it. We're making a case about these millions of pigs locked in crates. One industry person said, "Sower animals can't turn around for the 2.5 years." I don't know who asked the sow if she wanted to turn around. From the leading trade association spokesperson. 250 million hens kept in cages now. 9 billion chickens raised for meat on farms. But we're starting to see changes because of the pressure that you and other people of conscience are applying, and groups like HSUS pushing and prodding and figuring out channels of reform. Nestle, the biggest food company in the world, has adopted now the 5 freedoms of farm animal welfare. One of those 5 freedoms is the ability for animals to engage in natural, normal behaviors and movements. Walmart also adopted this. The largest food seller in the U.S. by a country mile, sells 25% of all groceries in the U.S. And McDonald's, 2 Septembers ago in 2015, said that, not quite 2 Septembers ago, McDonald's said that it's moving completely to cage-free for the 2 billion eggs. This has led to a revolution. This was a Fortune story 2 years ago. Now it's more than 200 companies that we've convinced to change their purchasing practices for animal products from factory farms. No extreme confinement. You can see these are some of the brands that have made pledges to HSUS on these issues. And now I'm happy to say it's a new one almost every week. We've gotten all the big names, and I can't even fit them all on this slide. And this is just in the last 2 years. And we're now glad I mentioned that SeaWorld adopted changes to its food policies. I hope every zoo and aquarium in the United States, for all of its concession programs, adopts these same principles. Every food service provider, every hospital, every school system should be adopting these principles, because if you don't, we're going to have animals in these confinement cages. And now we're working on the biggest issue of all numerically, which is the broiler birds, the 9 billion chickens raised for meat. We have 4 big steps that we're asking companies to adopt, to change the breeds, to give them more space, to allow enrichment in their environments, and to have more humane slaughter practices. And I'm proud to say that in the last few months, we've gotten all these companies to agree to the 4-plank platform. But beyond the issue of animal products and making the circumstances more livable, we cannot keep raising this number of animals for food. The average American eats 30 terrestrial animals a year. If you add in the fish, it's probably another few dozen. 30 terrestrial animals a year. It's cows, pigs, and chickens per person. Just do the arithmetic. 320 million Americans times 30 is 9 billion. That's how many animals we raise. And Bill Gates, a guy known for innovation himself, said by 2030, the world will need millions of tons more meat than it does today, but meeting that demand with animal products isn't sustainable. The meat market is ripe for reinvention. So just as we have solved through human intelligence and intuition and entrepreneurial activity many of these problems of animal cruelty, now we need to solve this one. And fortunately, there are people working on it every day. There are companies like Beyond Meat that are producing plant-based proteins that have the same taste and texture as meat, the same protein content, but none of the antibiotics, none of the hormones, none of the fat and cholesterol, or less in the way of fat and cholesterol. And just like the early computers might have been a little bit slow and clunky, but they get better every year, these companies are getting better every year at producing these products. The Beyond Burger, which is a new plant-based burger, tastes like meat. It bleeds when you have it in the frying pan. I mean, we can do this. We can have something that's not just an equivalent. We can have something that's far superior when you look at the different metrics: taste, texture, morality, effect on the environment, resource use, water use. I mean, it's not even a close call. And all it does is all it requires of us is to shift our palate just a little bit and to make different choices in the marketplace that will yield incredible amounts of reduced suffering and better outcomes for the planet. It's so simple. We control it. It's not somebody far off, it's us. So I hope you'll take action. I hope you'll join us in this enterprise. We are trying to make this world safe for other animals. And we've been so disassociated from so many of the practices that we just continue them. But it's always a small group of people who are in the vanguard of driving social reforms in our society. We're not the same society in the United States that we were 200 years ago, 100 years ago, 50, or even 25. You know, we were a nation founded on important principles. But for the first 80 years of our nation, we allowed chattel slavery. It was abolished with the Civil War in 1865. For the first 140 years, we denied women the right to vote. Suffragettes were mocked and ridiculed for advocating that women have the franchise. It wasn't until a constitutional amendment was passed in 1920 or so that half the nation was allowed to vote. We had violence by the state against civil rights activists in the 1950s. We're still struggling with other issues, but as part of our moral evolution, we have attempted to conquer many of these injustices, and we have. And now we're staring at one of the biggest injustices of them all: the mass exploitation of millions and billions of creatures for practices and activities and habits for which we now have alternatives and options. So it's up to us to make this a humane economy. And one of the ways we do it is by collectively organizing ourselves, by being part of organizations like the Detroit Zoo and HSUS to propel big changes. Each of you has more power than you realize. Thanks very much.
For the sake of your question.
Yeah.
It's 5 cups.
Yes, thank you.
FYI, if we do all of the things that Wayne has just talked about, especially the last part, climate change would be a completely different discussion because of the amount of methane that is produced by all of these animals in factory farming. Wildlife would have far more space and resources. So beyond all of the compassion, which obviously should be our starting point, the science and the vitality of our planet would be so much better. Very little of what you just heard about tonight actually would have happened were it not for Wayne in HSUS. And of course, there are many others that are involved and help, but his extraordinary leadership and drive and magical diplomatic and political acumen have just created remarkable progress in the past two decades. So anyway, we will entertain just a few questions because I know a lot of you want to get his book signed. And we have microphones. Don't grab the microphones. Our staff will hold them.
Wayne, thank you. That was awesome. So in 2010 at HSUS's Taking Action for Animals conference, you said something so profound that has stuck with me all these years. I quote frequently, and that's when your opposition has to start using the language of animal protection in its own messaging, then you know you're making progress. And I think that is totally the truth, because as we see the animals and entertainment industry, we see the factory farming industry talk about things like species-specific behaviors and all of these, these different things that we have always talked about. Fundamental rights of animals. I hear that in the animal entertainment industry. So one of the things that I'm seeing increasingly on the legislative effort is these quick reporting laws that the factory farming industry is cloaking as animal welfare legislation that would criminalize anybody. It would really impose criminal penalties on anybody who doesn't report an act of animal cruelty on a factory farm within 24 hours, which at first glance seems like a good thing, but really cuts at the heart of the undercover investigations that shine a spotlight on this systematic cruelty on factory farms. So as the opposition increasingly has to adopt the language of animal protection and packaging and animal protection in order to stay relevant in an increasingly humane economy, how can we cut through the noise better as advocates and make sure that we continue to be heard and that our messaging is effective?
Yeah.
Sorry for the long question.
No, thank you. Well, until a few years ago, we had no laws to protect farm animals at all. So we were in a pre-regulation phase in our country when it came to those animals. We had some laws to protect dogs from fighting, and we had some laws to protect other animals, but none of the farm animals had any protection. So we've seen with all these companies, these new corporate policies, but we've done a bunch of ballot initiatives to protect farm animals. And one of the other things that's happened is multiple organizations have gone into the farms to simply document routine practices, not necessarily to find criminal activity, although criminal activity has come to be documented by some of these undercover investigators because the animals were so terribly treated, or they were starved, or some awful circumstance befell them. But in many cases, it was just showing these animals in cages, and the industry's response was to try to criminalize the videographers or the photographers, or to require that they release all the results of the investigation, overnight. Now, we've had people undercover at these facilities for weeks because you don't just take a picture and then that's it. You want to document what's going on over time. I mean, the FBI, when it goes and does an undercover operation, doesn't go in one night and then the investigation is done. That's not the way law enforcement works. So I do think that because of our success, we're facing a backlash. And I do think that they are trying to capture the vocabulary of animal welfare. And, when I started an animal advocacy group as a college student, we were dismissed. Oh, animals don't matter. Animals aren't intelligent. Why don't you go help people? Now the dialogue has shifted because now we know that animals are intelligent. Now we know that cruelty is wrong. And they're trying to say, we care for them properly. They're properly fed. They're sheltered. In a factory farm, it's true, they do feed them and shelter them. The problem with their thinking is the narrow metrics, that animal welfare is not just about having an animal fed and giving an animal water and giving an animal shelter. Those are important metrics. But the ability to move is also important. And the ability to have something to do and have some enrichment is important. And I think this is really the science issue that Ron has really brought to the fore within the zoo community, is how do we measure animal welfare? Animal welfare is not just about productivity, right? It used to be the fact that, if they were unhealthy, they wouldn't have babies. Now we know that there's not a big correlation between reproductive activity and animal welfare. I mean, we know that certain body functions are occurring, but it doesn't mean that the animal is in a good psychological or physical state that they're reproducing. You can look to the human circumstance and see people in pretty bad shape who are reproducing as well. So I answered your long question with a longer answer. So
I'm real pleased to hear about the airlines saying they won't ship body parts, and I'm pleased about all the grocery stores that are saying they're coming up. But who's monitoring this? Because frankly, I don't know if I trust governmental organizations that supposedly monitor these things.
Yeah, well, it's a good and important question, and this is why not only do I think we need government regulation and government rules, because laws exist in so many ways to maintain order in our society, but they also reflect our values and they also capture outliers. I mean, most of us agree that dogfighting is wrong, 99.9% of us, but it only takes that 0.1% to create havoc, which is why we need to enforce our laws against dogfighting. And this is the circumstance with airlines or with companies, that there needs to be a third party, that's taking a look. We sometimes play the third party by doing undercover investigations. Sometimes law enforcement does that. Sometimes the industry may have an auditing program where they have a third party come in and do this. There's a program that I'm part of called the Global Animal Partnership. If you go to Whole Foods, you'll see all the animal products labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And those are different levels of animal welfare that have been achieved on the farm. Level 1 is no cages and crates. 2 is no routine mutilations. 3 is access to pasture. 4 is pasture-based entirely. 5 is slaughtered on the farm, so you don't have to transport them somewhere else, because transportation can be problematic for animals. So that program, as part of it, has an auditing. A hired firm goes in and inspects the farms. At the federal level, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has inspectors that go inspect the puppy mills, or they go into the labs. Now, we may be unsatisfied with some of those outcomes, but those are the ways that enforcement occurs, and we have to be vigilant, get more money, more reliability, demand that politicians and executive agencies enforce the laws properly.
Is number 2 no routine mutilation?
Yes.
Is that what you said?
Yes.
Can you imagine in our society that we actually have to say that, we have to do that it's, wow.
Yeah.
Hi, yes, you mentioned about people getting involved and being active, not just like looking by and staying silent. Could you tell us when the next spotlight, or more frankly, a protest would be coming with the HSUS, and how someone like me can get involved?
Yeah, no,
I have
that's
no
great.
problem getting in my car and going. And then
Good for
I'm
you.
ready. I'm ready, yeah.
Oh, that's great.
So what's coming up then, if I can ask?
Well, one of the things that I urge you to do is to go to our website, humanestudy.org, and put your email address in so you'll get alerts. And we know, if you put your address in, then we know to send it to you if there's something going on in Michigan, if there's a lobby day in Lansing, or if there's a protest, or if there's some other action. So again, the number one thing is to get in the information flow. So if you go to our website, you can also sign up to get my blog. I write a blog each weekday that talks about issues. It's called A Humane Nation. It's free. You can subscribe. It'll come into your inbox each day. And then if you're a member of HSUS, you get our magazine, and there are calls to action there, writing to lawmakers, writing to corporations, affirming people who do the right thing. So your engagement, it's much more important. I mean, the money is important to allow us to have a professional staff to take on these issues. But it's vital that you as individuals are involved, because this is a movement we're creating. We need millions of people taking action in their daily lives to influence these outcomes. We need millions of people pushing politicians to do the right thing. We've got an incredible agenda. We've got 200 major campaigns at HSUS. You can plug into them and find 1 or 2 or 200 that work for you.
Yeah, I think I heard that maybe next weekend there's going to be a circus in Dearborn, so that might be something.
Yeah, sure, someone
might want to say something about. I don't know what they would say, but we'll take 2 more questions.
How about there were a couple hands up there. There's one.
I'm very concerned about trophy hunting here in Michigan. I've been told there's over 60 trophy hunting facilities here where animals are raised to be shot. Ted Nugent has a huge facility in Southwest where he brought in all these Russian boars. I have not seen any action or push to get rid of these or to write legislation to stop? Because how can we tell other countries not to trophy hunt when we allow 60 facilities here in our state?
Oh, you couldn't be more on the mark on your comment. These are disgraceful activities where animals are fenced in, unable to escape, typically bred to be hunted, shot just for a trophy. It's trophy hunting in its purest form. And, Ted Nugent is particularly sadistic about it. He shoots animals with arrows, and he, does it over and over again. The numbers of animals that he kills, I mean, there's a pathology and a sadism to it seems to me. So we've worked to ban these captive mammal hunts in 25 states, and it certainly is on our list in Michigan. The Michigan legislature right now is generally not favorable to wildlife protection efforts. That's the crowd that overturned citizens' efforts to stop trophy hunting of wolves multiple times. They passed 3 different measures to do this after voters with 55% and 64% said no. The big measure passed in every single county. People favored us, every single county in the Lower Peninsula, and we also won a number of counties in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So it's terrible, and this is why we need some new people in office, and that would be a very important bill. And frankly, responsible hunters should be standing shoulder to shoulder with us on that issue.
The new law that was passed in Alaska, in which hunters are allowed to go into bear dens and I think wolf dens during the hibernating period to destroy the animals. Is there some way that that's going to be stopped? And also, what about soaring that's done in the horse states of Kentucky and I think Tennessee?
Well, you've identified 2 issues where we were on the path to reform, and the new political leadership in the country is trying to unwind those protections. In October of 2015, the National Park Service finalized a rulemaking action, so it has the force of law, to forbid aerial hunting of grizzly bears, hunting of grizzlies, wolves, wolverines during their denning season, and to stop the use of steel-jaw traps and snares on 20 million acres of national preserves managed by the Park Service in Alaska. About 10 months later, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service adopted a nearly identical rule for 76 million acres of national wildlife refuges divided between 16 different national wildlife refuges in Alaska. Under what was previously a little used provision of law called the Congressional Review Act, the Congress, led by the Alaska Congressional Delegation, had an opportunity to have an expedited review of the latter rule, not the National Park Service rule, but the Fish and Wildlife Service rule. Anything since May of 2016 was vulnerable to review by the Congress. So the Congress took this issue up, and in a near party line vote, Republican lawmakers and President Trump voted to nullify the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service rule to allow those despicable practices if the state of Alaska wants to use them. We don't have any immediate recourse because under this Congressional Review Act, the law forbids the agency from ever adopting a similar rulemaking action. We are looking at a potential ballot initiative in Alaska to address it. The National Park Service rule is still intact because, again, that Congressional Review Act only allows a look back to May of 2016, and the opportunity for doing any additional rules expires right about now. So what they've done is done, basically. But the Park Service rule could be overturned through some other legislative maneuver, but we think we're going to be able to stop it. I do want to note that both Gary Peters and Debbie Stabenow favored the HSUS position on that issue. All of the Democrats in the House congressional delegation favored our position, and one Republican did, Fred Upton, from the Kalamazoo, St. Joe area in southern western Michigan. So that was a really disappointing and heartbreaking outcome. We had one of our volunteers, we had 2,000 of our volunteers making phone calls. We have a computer program that allows you as individuals to call other folks, to call them to action. We had one incredible woman in New York City make 18,000 phone calls in support of our position. It was just beyond belief. The other issue you mentioned is called horse soaring. Some of you, if you're HSUS supporters, know of it. If you're not an HSUS supporter, you may not know about it. It's a practice that trainers use to injure the front legs and feet of Tennessee walking horses used in show performances. And they either injure their feet by mechanical means, by putting a sharp object under their hoof after they shave the hoof down, and then they pressure shoe so the foreign object is grating or digging into the animal's feet, or they burn chemicals on their feet and cause them so much pain that when they step down on the ground, they lift their legs higher, which is what the judges at these horse shows value when they decide which horse is going to win the show. Again, it's a practice called soaring. It was criminalized with a weak statute with a number of loopholes in 1970. We've been working to upgrade it. And the Obama administration, as one of the last acts, had a rule to strengthen the law to forbid it. Somebody messed up at the Federal Register's office the day before the inauguration of President Trump. Didn't get finalized. The Monday after the president was inaugurated, he froze all regulations in progress, so it's been frozen since that time. We've got bills in the House and Senate, a bill in the House that has a majority of House members already co-sponsoring the legislation, so we're working hard to address it, and I'm confident at some point we're gonna prevail on that issue.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap it up because it's already 8:30, and Wayne is going to be signing books, and our experience over the past 3 nights is that takes quite a while. So let's give a round of applause for Wayne, please. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And in about 3 or 4 minutes, if you come out to the lobby and you would like to have your book signed, Wayne will be happy to do it. And there are also books available for sale if you want to buy them. Thank you for coming tonight.